Okay, so any questions on anything we've been talking about? All right, the last comment I should have said in terms of the saturated and unsaturated fats, and then we're going to move on to other types of lipids, is we might ask the following question. Do we even need fats in our diet at all? Yes. And the answer is yes, emphatically yes. But the only essential fats that we require are unsaturated fats. And what foods are the best source of the unsaturated fats? Plants. All right? So in other words, you don't have to be a meat eater at all. There's nothing, we don't need saturated fats at all. Okay, but we do need unsaturated fats. And the only way, the major sources of unsaturated fats come from plants. Whether it's grains, vegetables, fruits, and so on. All right, another category of lipid are prostaglandins. Prostaglandins belong to a larger category of molecules collectively called eicosanoids. Now, what are prostaglandins? Before I explain what they are, let's look at what a picture of what a prostaglandin looks like. If you look on the previous page, A8, on the bottom of A8, this is a prostaglandin. Now really, there's a whole family of prostaglandin molecules. This particular one is labeled PGE1, prostaglandin E1. There's a whole bunch of others. What is it? Basically, these are just two long fatty acids. A fatty acid, we know, is just a long chain of carbon atoms with a bunch of hydrogens attached. So here they are. These are two fatty acids that are linked together, looped together at this end. Now, how they got the name prostaglandin is because they were first discovered, and I think this is around the 60s, 1960s, they were first discovered in the prostate gland of guys. So they were called prostaglandin, from prostate gland. That has nothing to do with what their function is. That's just the first place they located them. We know that prostaglandins are all over the place. And here's what they are all about, what they're for. So on page A9, prostaglandins are released from cells that are injured. When cells are injured, they release these chemicals called prostaglandins. So any injured cell releases prostaglandin chemicals. How does this work? When cells are injured, it shakes up their cell membrane. Now, what's the cell membrane mostly made of? Phospholipids, a type of fat, a phospholipid. And when these cell membranes are disrupted, injured, there's an activation of an enzyme called phospholipase. Now, does phospholipase, from its name, sound like it might act on phospholipids? And how would you know it's the name of an enzyme? It ends in ACE, ASE. So this enzyme is activated, and it converts some of the phospholipids in the cell membrane into prostaglandins. All right, so fine. Phospholipids are turned into prostaglandins and released from the cell. So what? What do prostaglandins do? They cause inflammation. We're going to learn a lot more about inflammation. Some of you may have learned a little bit about inflammation or the nonspecific immune response in microbiology. Did I recommend taking that before this class? Yes, I did. All right, so we will have a lot more to say about it, but for right now, we'll simply say that prostaglandins, along with a bunch of other chemicals, contribute to this inflammatory response, which is characterized by redness, warmth, swelling, and pain. Those are four classical signs of inflammation: redness, warmth, swelling, and pain. Now, we'll learn more about how prostaglandins cause this and what the purpose of the redness, warmth, and swelling and pain are. They do have a purpose, but we'll get to that later. Let me give you two quick examples, though, of this, what I've just described. Let's imagine that you're hammering a nail, right? You got a hammer, pounding a nail. The hammer misses the head of the nail and slams right into your thumb. Have you injured your thumb? You've injured your thumb. You've injured your cells. What do injured cells do? They start releasing these prostaglandins. What do the prostaglandins cause? Inflammation. Within a matter of moments, your thumb's turning all red, it's feeling all warm, it's swelling up, and it's hurting like hell. We say it's inflamed. All right? That's prostaglandins, along with some other chemicals, are causing that to happen. Now again, there's a reason for it, but I'll get to the reason at another time. Let me give you a second example. Let's imagine, this time it's not that you're hammering your finger, but you have strep throat. All right? And what's strep throat? What is strep throat? You have a bacterial infection. Streptococcus pyogenes, right? Beta hemolytic streptococcus infection. So you have a streptococcal infection, a bacterial infection. Now, what's wrong with bacteria? So what's the problem of having these streptococcal bacteria in your throat?
Damage to the body.
Because bacteria are living things. You'd say, yeah, so all living things need food. You'd say, okay, so bacteria in your throat, they need food. What are they going to eat? You. They're a parasite. You are their meal. They're looking around. Pretend I'm a bacteria, and I'm hungry. What am I going to eat? I'm going to eat you. I'm surrounded by you. So they start eating your throat cells. So as they start to feed on your cells, they're parasites. Are they injuring your cells? Yes. What do injured cells do? They release prostaglandins. What do prostaglandins cause? Your throat starts to get all red, warm, swollen, and hurts like hell. That's a sore throat. Yeah, that's the swelling, isn't it? So we're going to learn what the purpose of all that is, but that's an example of, again, we'd say your throat is inflamed. Not because you injured it, of trauma, injury, but physical injury, but because of an infection. So anything that injures your body can lead to inflammation, whether it's physical injury, physical trauma, or whether it's an infection. We'll have a lot more to say about that. Now, these first two examples I've given you, the area gets inflamed, like you hit your thumb, and then it's going to heal. The inflammation will go down. As the cells heal, they stop releasing prostaglandins, and when there's less prostaglandins, the inflammation subsides. When you have that strep throat, so you take amoxicillin, takes a penicillin, that kills the bacteria, your cells start to heal, they stop releasing prostaglandins, the inflammation, the redness, swelling, pain subsides. Sometimes, though, there's chronic inflammation. An example of chronic inflammation would be arthritis. Itis means inflammation. That's what itis means. Arthritis is inflammation of the joints. There are different types of arthritis. If you had me for anatomy, in my anatomy class, I present 3 different categories of arthritis. Osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, gouty arthritis. Everything in medicine is multifactorial. There's nothing that's simple. Everything is multiple factors and complex. But let's just keep it simple. One of the common types of arthritis, one of the more common types, technically called osteoarthritis, is where you get chronic inflammation of a joint that's been repeatedly injured. So athletes who repeatedly have injured their knee, it reaches a point where instead of getting inflamed and healing, where it stops being inflamed, it just stays chronically inflamed. So now this person has chronic arthritis. Their joint, their knee joint, for example, is just chronically in pain and swollen and in pain. So if somebody does have chronic inflammation, it's not helping. Whatever benefit inflammation might have been, it's certainly not helping now because it's chronic. It's not going away. It's not getting better. So what they commonly will give them are NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Well, from its name, anti-inflammatory drug, that should reduce inflammation. Now, what's an example of an NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug? Aspirin and Advil. Aspirin is the original classic NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. Advil was a brand name for ibuprofen. There's a lot of brand names. Those of you going into pharmacy, you're going to learn 3,000 drug names. I know 500. You'll know 3,000. All right, so the ibuprofen, there's many brands of ibuprofen. Motrin is another brand of ibuprofen, just like Advil. There's a whole bunch of these. So these are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. How do they work? They actually prevent the formation of prostaglandins. By preventing the formation of prostaglandins, therefore this injured cell, which is injured, it's chronically injured, and it keeps releasing prostaglandin, causing chronic inflammation, they want to turn that inflammation off. It's not getting better. It's not helping. So they want to reduce the release of prostaglandins and reduce that chronic pain and swelling. So that's how these drugs would commonly be used for chronic inflammatory problems, chronic skeletal muscular injuries, especially things like arthritis and so on. There are a whole bunch of NSAIDs. Aleve, naproxen is another one. Again, there's tons of these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. All right, we have promised that this course, you will learn more about medicines or drugs than any other prerequisite course, in fact, more than all of them combined in this one class. We're going to really get into a lot of drugs and how they work. We're going to tell you a lot more about NSAIDs before we're done. Any questions about prostaglandins? All right, the next group of fats, we're still talking about fats, are monoglycerides, diglycerides, and triglycerides. Now, we're going to call them by those names. That's the names that the doctors usually use. The biochemists, and some of you have had biochemistry or majors bio, the proper names today is not mono, di, and triglyceride, but monoacylglycerol, diacylglycerol, and triacylglycerol. But we'll go by their traditional older names. What are they? In essence, here's what it is. Glycerol is a 3-carbon sugar. It's a 3-carbon molecule. It's a sugar. If you have one fatty acid, a fatty acid attached to this top carbon, we call it a monoglyceride. Right? It's got one fatty acid. Mono means one. If you have 2 fatty acids, this one and this one, then it's called a diglyceride. If you have 3 fatty acids, one attached to each of the 3 carbons, called a triglyceride. Why do we care? Why we care is because that's how fatty acids are stored in your fat cells. So you learned in anatomy, right? You need to know anatomy for this class. In anatomy, you learned about adipose tissue, or fat cells, or adipocytes. So adipocytes, or fat cells, are characterized by having a large vacuole that stores fat. But how is the fat stored in that vacuole? The fatty acids are attached to glycerol and stored within the fat cell as triglycerides. Now this is reversible because when you need those fats for energy, then you break apart the triglyceride, you break it back apart into 3 fatty acids, and they're re-released back into the bloodstream. So then they're available for the cells of your body to use for energy. All right, so the important thing is this is how fatty acids are stored in our fat cells. Let's reflect on this. Have we learned today how sugars are stored in our body? How are sugars stored in our body? As glycogen. And where is that glycogen stored? Good, in our liver cells and muscle cells. All right, now we're learning how fats are stored in our body. They're stored as triglycerides in our fat cells. This is what physiology is. It's all this physiological chemistry of our body, of how it all works. On the next page, it just shows at the top in a little bit more detail. It shows how the fatty acids are attached to glycerol. So this is the glycerol molecule. It's 3 carbon atoms big, right? And this is a fatty acid. Here's another one. Here's the 3rd fatty acid. Now, just looking at this, the fatty acid has been abbreviated. It's been written in a kind of shorthand way. Because you're thinking, well, wait a second. Didn't you tell us a fatty acid, a saturated fatty acid, is just a long chain of carbon atoms with a bunch of hydrogens attached? I did. We know at one end, there's a carboxylic acid group, a carboxyl group. Here it is, the double bonded oxygen and OH, and then the rest of it's just a long chain of carbons with hydrogens. This was represented by writing, in this case, CH214. So what does that mean, CH214? Look, what's CH2? Is that CH2 right there? Does everybody see that? Carbon with 2 hydrogens? Let's just write that 14 times. Well, if you end up writing that 14 times, that's just a long fatty acid, a saturated fatty acid. So this is just a shorthand way. Instead of drawing out this entire long molecule, they just wrote it shorthand like this. Now, how is the fatty acid actually attached to the glycerol? Answer, by a dehydration synthesis reaction. This is the way organic compounds are commonly joined together. We covered this earlier today when we showed you how 2 sugars are joined together, right? Glucose and fructose forming sucrose. So an H is removed from one of these molecules, an OH from the other, forming H2O. And right where the H and the OH used to be is where they snap together. All right? So if you do that 3 times, right, you end up with a triglyceride, here it is, and 3 water molecules. How do you make it go in reverse? If you wanted to break that triglyceride back apart into fatty acids, because you need the fatty acids for energy, then you're just going to add water. And when you add water to make something break apart, that's called a hydrolysis reaction. So this, we're going to see this over and over and over again. It's a very common type of chemical reaction by which organic molecules are either snapped together or split apart. Okay, on the next page, phospholipids. Phospholipids. Now, we already know why phospholipids are important, because phospholipids make up membranes of cells. Incidentally, on all this junk that I'm going over, again, I'm not asking you to draw pictures of molecules on a blank sheet of paper. I'm not. They do make you do that in biochemistry courses and in Majors Bio, but that's not what I'm doing. That's not what we're here for. I'm showing you the pictures of the molecules because they do differ in their shape. And that way we learn a little bit more about that molecule than just a name. But our main interest is understanding what they're for, their functions. That's what physiology is about, is why these chemicals are important in our body, what they're used for. Anyhow, so phospholipids. Now, what does a phospholipid look like? It's actually kind of similar to a triglyceride. Just like a triglyceride, here's the 3-carbon glycerol molecule. And just like a triglyceride, there's a fatty acid attached to the top carbon and a fatty acid attached to the second carbon. The difference is in the bottom 3rd carbon. Attached to the 3rd carbon, rather than being another fatty acid, is a phosphate group. Phosphate is phosphorus and 4 oxygens. And phosphate actually has an electrical polarity. It's got an electrical polarity. Anything with an electrical polarity will generally dissolve in water. For all you chemists out there, you know that water is a polar solvent. What we mean by that is that if this is a water molecule, right, H2O, in reality, the hydrogens of the water molecule have a slight positive polarity, and the oxygen has a slight negative polarity. So that's water. Any chemical that has an electrical polarity, like phosphate, is going to easily dissolve in water. It will be hydrophilic. It will like water. It will like water. So this phosphate, part of this phospholipid, likes water. It's hydrophilic. That's in contrast to the fatty acids, which hate water. Didn't we learn earlier today that fats don't mix with water? Vegetable oil won't mix with water. Fats won't mix with water. Butter won't mix with water. So the rest of this is typically hydrophobic. The fatty acids are hydrophobic. They hate water. So what we actually have is a schizophrenic molecule. This part here likes water, containing the phosphate, and the rest of it is a typical fat that hates water. Now, I use the word schizophrenic, which means split personality. That's really a term that's used in psychiatry for a mental disorder. It's a serious mental disorder. The chemists actually use the term, and I'm not asking you to know it, but they would use the term amphpathic. What does amphpathic mean? Same as schizophrenic, split personality. But now, just to understand the phospholipid a little bit better, look on the previous page, A10. And on A10, so this shows, in a little bit more detail, a phospholipid. This is the glycerol, the 1, 2, 3 carbons. Here's the phosphate group. Notice the negative polarity, and so that makes it hydrophilic. And these are the 2 long fatty acids, the saturated fatty acids, which are hydrophobic, okay, because there's no electrical polarity on that. So, because looking at this shape, the way they commonly represent a phospholipid molecule is they commonly represent it like this. All right? To me, I always tell students this reminds me of a balloon with 2 strings. Right? Kind of like a balloon with 2 strings. The balloon part is the phosphate. The two strings are these two long fatty acid chains. So the balloon part is the hydrophilic portion of the phospholipid. The two fatty acids are the hydrophobic part. Now, a cell membrane, as you all learned in biology and anatomy, basically looks like this. A cell membrane is made up of a double layer of phospholipids. Basically, you have an outer and an inner layer of these balloons with two strings. And the balloon part is the hydrophilic portion, and the strings, and in this case, it's this whole middle section of the cell membrane, is hydrophobic. We'll have more to say about a cell membrane later. But that's their importance, but we'll learn much more about that later. Okay. The last group of lipids that we're going to speak about are steroids. Steroids are a type of lipid. Now, when I say the word steroid, or anybody hears the word steroid, most people immediately think steroid hormones. And that's absolutely correct. It's absolutely correct. But most people do not, when I say the word steroid, say cholesterol. But in fact, the parent steroid of them all is cholesterol. All